everybody, I'm Kathryn from the Sewing Studio Fabric Superstore and the Sewing Studio at Lady Lake. I can't wait to help get you started learning everything you need to know today about your brand new BabyLock Zeal. Let's get started. The BabyLock Zeal has some excellent features for you that's going to help get your sewing journey started, and I'd like to review some of the top ones. Okay, so first of all, this machine has 25 built-in stitches. There is a needle threader here on the side of the machine, which makes it super easy to deal with. You also have a built-in thread cutter right here, also on this side of the machine. Right here in the front of the machine, there's a drop-in bobbin. There's also an accessory storage bin. So here on the side, underneath your free arm sewing, there's an accessory storage bin. Additionally, you have access to free arm sewing, as well as a one-step buttonhole. Woohoo! This machine weighs less than 15 pounds, which is great for taking it to classes or to travel to visit family and friends. You can take your machine with you. And there's also 6 inches of bed width here that gives you access for heavier, bulkier projects or things that you need a lot of room for. I'd like to go over everything that you're going to find when you open up your box with your brand new BabyLock Zeal. Okay, so first of all, installed on the machine is your standard presser foot, the A foot. You also have an over edge foot, which is foot C. You have a zipper foot, foot E. You have a blind hemming foot, which is foot G. There's also a buttonhole foot B, and you also have an automatic buttonhole foot R. This machine also gives you, they also come with a pack of 5 needles, which is great. They're in different sizes and they perform different functions. You've got 4 bobbins included with your machine, as well as a screwdriver and a lint brush. And who doesn't need a seam ripper? You've got a quilt bar, which helps you line up your stitches, and I'll go over that in detail later. You have 2 different size of spool caps to help hold your thread nice and snug to your machine. You have an additional spool pin for doing twin needle sewing, and the spool felt that goes on that pin to help just kind of keep a grip on your thread. To install your power cord, you've got a rounded side edge of your power cord and a flat side edge. You're going to match that with the flat side and round side here on your machine. So simply spin it in and plug it in. Once you have it plugged in, here is your power switch. Up, toggle your switch up, and that turns it on. Toggling it down turns it off. Let's begin by winding our bobbin. So the first thing we need to do is install this thread up here onto the spool pin. So you're simply going to place your thread right on your spool pin with it coming off the bottom of the spool. Then you're going to place your spool cap on, snugging up your spool right against the back of your spool pin. From there, we're going to come over to this end of the machine where we're going to get ready for the tension on the bobbin. So first and foremost, we're going to come around this groove right here, this little lever. Now we're going to go clockwise around our tension disc for our bobbin thread. So we're coming in around at about 3 o'clock, spin it up around 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So right around the clock, and then we're going to head over to the bobbin. Once we're there, we're going to insert our thread from the inside of the bobbin up to the outside of the bobbin. There's a little hole that you'll see, so you just have to get it where you can get that thread right into that little hole. Once you've got that installed, go ahead and get a grip on your thread because you're going to need to hold on to it while you're winding your bobbin. Bring your spool or your bobbin over here to where we're going to install it on the bobbin winder. There's a little wire here and there's a groove on the bobbin that needs to line up with that. So go ahead and set that bobbin down with that little groove right on that wire. At this point, we need to disengage the drive shaft. So over here on the hand wheel on the right end of your machine, you're simply going to pull out your hand wheel. Once you've done that, it disengages the drive shaft so the needle isn't going up and down while you're winding your bobbin. You'll pull your bobbin over to the right. It comes against this little kind of nester, and now you can put your foot on the foot pedal and start winding your bobbin. Once you've wound a little bit, you can get some scissors and cut off your excess thread there at the top of your bobbin. And continue to wind. Once you're happy with the amount of thread you have on your bobbin, you can simply take your foot off the foot pedal, or you can just let it fill if you want to fill the whole entire bobbin. I'm happy with about a half a bobbin right now. So I'm going to start by disengaging the bobbin from the little nester, lift it straight up, and we'll get some scissors and cut our thread here. Okay, now we need to get this bobbin into the machine. Before I install the bobbin, I want to show you that right here on the top of the bobbin cover, there's actually a little diagram which shows you how to install your bobbin properly. It comes off counterclockwise, so when you install your thread, you need to make sure you're making the letter P for perfect. Here on the right side, you've got a little button, and when you pull that little button to the right, it spring loads open your bobbin for you so that you can remove your bobbin cover. Okay, so this is a drop-in bobbin, so we're simply going to place our bobbin right down into the machine, and we're going to make sure we are P for perfect. We've got it turning counterclockwise. The thread is then going to come straight down towards 6 o'clock. There's a little notch here at the front, so you're going to hold onto your bobbin nice and tight so that you can swing your thread nice and taut from that 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Then leave your thread resting off around 11 o'clock on your clock. And we're going to pull that bobbin thread up later once we've installed our thread into the needle. Before I actually thread the machine, I need to make sure my presser foot is in the highest position. So make sure you raise that presser foot. Your tension disc for the thread starts right about here. So that door has to be open in order to receive the thread. And the way you open that door is by making sure your presser foot is up. All right, so once you've got your presser foot up, you're going to start by mounting your thread over here again, and then from the back of the machine towards the front, you're going to go in and insert that thread behind this little lever back here at the back. We're going to take the thread straight down the channel on the right-hand side. Once we do that down here at the bottom, we're going to make a U-turn and swing around towards the left-hand side. Once you've done that, you're going to come over here to the right. Now let me stop here for 1 second and just point out that I need to also make sure my needle is in the highest position for threading so that this uptake lever is extended out of the machine and visible for you. We're going to come from the right side to the left side, and it hooks the thread into that uptake lever. From that point, we're going to come straight back down the channel one more time, and then we need to come down here to where we're going to put the thread behind the little needle guide right here. Okay, so again, right here is our little thread guide, and we need to put the thread into that thread guide. It's right above the needle. So you're going to come around from the back to the front and install it right there. The BabyLock Zeal comes with a thread helper, an assistive threading device there. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to use that. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and put my presser foot down. At that point, I need to go ahead over here to my threader, and I'm going to pull that down as well. Now, if I look at this threader here on the left side of it, there's a little hook. It kind of acts as an extra little finger. So I'm going to use that to grab a hold of my thread so that I can sweep my thread from the left to the right of my needle. Down here on the right end of it, there is a little tiny hook that's gone through the eye of the needle. So I'm going to go ahead and put my thread and scoop it from low up to high to catch that hook. And then you gently have to let everything go, and it pulls a little loop towards the back. Once you have that little loop, go ahead and grasp a hold of it and simply pull your thread out to the left-hand side of the machine. In order to pull up the bobbin thread, you're going to begin by grasping your top thread with a gentle pressure. On the right-hand end of your machine, you're going to take the hand wheel and turn it towards yourself so that the needle falls down into the machine. And keep on spinning it towards yourself And what happens is the top thread grabs the bottom thread. Now I'm going to gently tug at my top thread to pull my bobbin thread up out of the machine. Once I have my bobbin thread up out of the machine, I'm going to go ahead and pull the rest of the tail out. Once I have that there, now both of my threads need to go underneath my presser foot. Okay, at this point you can go ahead and reinstall your bobbin cover. So the little tabs here simply go into that left side where the bobbin cover is, and you will simply push down your bobbin cover and everything is ready to go. Home sewing needles have a flat side and a rounded side. When we install our needle into the machine, we need to make sure that flat side is facing the back of the machine. So I'm going to start by inserting the tip of the needle kind of down into the needle area of the machine, and I'm going to lift the needle then straight up into the machine. If I could just show you right here, I'm actually going to hold the needle with my left hand. On the right side here, there's a little window on the top of the needle area. You can actually see the top of the needle protruding up into the machine right there by the drive shaft. And that's very, very important because you need to make sure you install your needle all the way up to its highest position. Once you can see that needle in that area, you're going to go ahead and take a hold of your needle screw and tighten it down into position, and that's going to hold the needle into place. Let's take a moment to discuss the needle plate and bobbin cover markings. So this needle plate is wonderful because you have markings on the left and right side of the needle. So depending on how you're feeding your project, you're able to choose which markings you want to use. The markings on the back of the needle plate are in inches and inch increments. The markings on the front of the needle plate are in centimeters and metric. Right here on your bobbin cover, again, on the back part, you've got markings in inches and inch increments, and on the front, you have markings in metric. To install the presser foot, we're going to take a look right here at the front. You've got this little bar kind of in the center of your foot that goes across the foot. That little bar needs to install back by the presser foot holder. There's kind of like a little C-clamp here on the presser foot holder, and there's a little wire in there that's going to grab a hold of the bar. So you're going to take your presser foot and place it with that bar directly under that little C-clamp, and then lower your presser foot, and it will click into place. Give a little tap just to make sure your foot is installed properly. When you want to remove this presser foot so you can put another different kind of presser foot on for a different application, here at the back of the machine, you've got a little black lever. You're going to squeeze it towards the front of the machine and it drops that foot off. The BabyLock Zeal comes equipped with an accessory storage bin, which is great to hold all of your presser feet and tools. So right here underneath the little free arm cover, here at the bottom, you can simply grasp a hold of it and slide towards the left, and your accessory compartment is right there. If you remove that, we can now also talk about how your BabyLock Zeal comes equipped with free arm sewing. So this little extension table simply pushes towards the left and it removes that way so you have access to your free arm. At the back of your machine, you have a little lever here which gives you the ability to drop your feed dogs for free motion quilting or free motion thread painting. So on the right is where your feed dogs are engaged. They are coming up, grabbing your fabric and pulling it backwards. If I want to disengage them for my free motion quilting or thread painting, I'm just going to take a hold of that little lever and toggle it towards the left. Now my feed dogs are disengaged. I'd like to take a moment to explain this dial here at the left end of the machine right over the needle area. This is the presser foot pressure dial. If I've got a lightweight fabric or a heavy fabric, a thicker, denser fabric, I might need to increase or decrease my presser foot pressure. 3 is the standard, so that's generally where I leave it. But you're welcome to test out different things. If you are struggling to manage your fabric, this dial allows you to change that presser foot pressure to better manage your fabrics. Okay, so now we're going to go over the knobs and dials that are on the front of your machine. This is where we're going to start to get into the really exciting meat of the lesson of this machine, this BabyLock Zeal. First and foremost, over here on the left end of your machine, you have your tension dial. Your tension dial comes out of the box set on 4, the number 4, and you'll notice there's a box around it. That's because 4 is your standard setting for most of the fabrics that you're going to be dealing with in sewing. That's generally where I leave mine. Now, if my top thread starts to pull up from the bottom, I'm going to want to go ahead and dial my spin my dial over here to about a 1 or a 2. If my bobbin thread is pulling up, then I might want to spin my dial to 6 or 8. Depending on what setting is going to be most successful. Test, test, test. But again, most of the time I leave my dial right there on 4. Right across the front of the machine, we have our stitches indicated in purple and black. Black are our utility stitches, purple are our stretch stitches. Each stitch correlates with a letter. So if I want to dial in a stitch, this is how I'm going to select it. And I'll go over that in a little bit more detail, just a little bit down the road here. Down here at the end, it also indicates that with this machine comes with a 1-step buttonhole, which is super exciting. On this width dial, there are numbers to indicate the stitch width. 5 would be the widest setting. And if you spin the dial to 0, that means it's the skinniest setting or no width at all. The other thing that this width knob does is move the needle position. So if I'm in a straight stitch, I can actually use my width dial to move my needle from a far right to a far left position. If I'm on a stitch width of 0, that's going to be the far left needle position. If I'm on a stitch width of 5, that's going to be the far right position. Again, that has to do with straight stitching. But for a zigzag stitch, that's where the width would be 5 is the widest and 0 is the most narrow or straight stitch, no width at all. Just below the width dial, we have our stitch selector. Okay, so let's go over how we might choose a particular stitch. Let's start with a zigzag because we were just talking about that. So I'm going to start by dialing a nice wide zigzag with my width dial here. And then I'm going to choose a zigzag that's just a normal zigzag. So it's a utility zigzag, which would be the letter C. So I'm going to turn my selector dial until I get to the letter C. That letter C lines up with this little black line at the top of the machine right here. So now I've chosen C, which is going to be a width of 5, a nice wide zigzag for that one. What if I wanted to do the triple stitch or rickrack stitch, which is a decorative stretch stitch of the letter C? So now I need to be down into my purple settings. On my selector knob, I'm still going to remain at the letter C, but how do I get to my purple or my stretch stitches, my decorative stitches? Down here on my length knob, there's actually a purple area which indicates my stretch stitch length. So I'm going to spin my length knob up to where the purple is lined up with the black line there above the knob. So I'm going to be able to do a little bit longer and a little bit shorter on the length of those stitches here on this, and the SS indicates second set of stitches on my length dial. Now I'd like to talk about the length dial. So I'm going to turn my selector dial to A, which is going to be a straight stitch center needle position. On my length, I'm going to now move it away from my second set or my stretch stitch selection, and I can actually spin my dial to get to the stitch length that I desire. Just be aware that 2.5 is your standard normal sewing stitch length. The last lever I want to talk about here is your reverse lever. When you first push on the reverse lever, there's a little bit of play there where it feels like you might be actually reversing. But in order to engage your reversing function, you need to not just gently push it, you need to push that lever all the way down to the bottom of its window to engage that reversing function. When you're done reversing, simply let go. Let's see that in action. So I usually start a seam by sewing a few stitches. Once I have a couple of stitches sewn, I'm going to push down my reverse lever all the way and sew in reverse, let go, and now I can sew forward again. When I come to the end of the seam, hold down my reverse lever for a few stitches and I'm done. While I'm right here, let me take a moment too to show you the thread cutter that's built in to this BabyLock Zeal. So I'm going to raise my presser foot there at the end of my seam and take my fabric out of the machine from under it. And here on the right side, there's a thread cutter. So I can swing my fabric up and around and it cuts it just as easily as that. Okay, so let's do a buttonhole. So here on the face of the machine, it indicates that we have a one-step buttonhole stitch selection. So I'm going to start by doing that. So here on my stitch selector knob, I'm going to spin my dial until I get to that little one-step buttonhole icon. From there, I'm going to come down to my length dial and I'm going to spin it towards the buttonhole area. So that's indicated between 0 and 1. Now, why would I lean towards 0? Why would I lean towards 1? Well, let's take a moment to discuss that. So right here, you can see that closer to 0, you're going to have a more compact or a more dense stitched buttonhole. And over on the right, as we lean closer to the 1, we would have a looser or less dense buttonhole. So why would I use one or the other? Well, if I had a denim, I would probably lean towards the 0 so I could have a nice compact dense buttonhole, because denim is such a dense fabric, it needs all those stitches to mind it, manage it, and hold it in place. Versus some sort of chiffon or satin, which really is such a lightweight fabric, I would lean closer to number 1 so that I'd have that nice delicate treatment on my buttonhole. This is the automatic buttonhole foot R. The letter R is indicated right there. So this is the foot that we're going to use when we install our buttonhole. Now, the machine is going to do this buttonhole in one step by reading the size of our button or the diameter of the button. So right here, we're going to need to open up this foot to receive our button. So we simply use your thumb and toggle that up, and it opens up this area at the top of the foot for the button. So once you open that up, you're going to place your button into that area and then pinch it down to snug the button nice and tightly held at the back of your buttonhole foot. Now that we have the button installed in the buttonhole foot, we need to install the foot onto the machine. So right there at the front of the foot, we've got the little bar, which is going to go underneath the presser foot holder. So slide your buttonhole foot right under that presser foot holder and bring down the presser foot holder to clamp it in place. Okay, back here at the back of that buttonhole foot, that's where the machine is going to let your fabric slide back and forth by the automatic buttonhole. So we need to pull the automatic buttonhole lever down to engage the distance or measuring of the button. So we're going to come back here to the buttonhole lever, simply grab a hold of it, and pull it down. Now that buttonhole lever is installed in between the two arms on that automatic buttonhole foot. So as it travels, once it hits the back of that, it's going to trigger it to sew forward once again. So this is where we have our automatic buttonhole. All right, let's see that in action. Once the buttonhole is complete, we're going to make sure our needle is up out of our fabric by turning the hand wheel towards yourself. So now that the needle is up out of the fabric, you're going to lift your presser foot and bring your fabric out from under the machine. Remember that automatic thread cutter? It's so fast and easy. Isn't that buttonhole beautiful? All right, we're ready to do the second buttonhole. For the second buttonhole, we need to reset so that it'll start sewing at the beginning of that buttonhole. So you're going to take your selector knob and spin it towards the right to reset. Once you've reset that buttonhole to start at the beginning, you'll spin it back over to the buttonhole selector, place your fabric under the machine, and get started with your second buttonhole. All right, now it's time to open up that buttonhole. So you're going to take your provided seam ripper, and on this side, the non-cutting side of it, you're going to start by placing that down against one end of your buttonhole, and you'll insert the seam ripper right there into that end. Once you have it there, I like to cut towards the center and stop, because I don't want to go accidentally all the way through and rip through the end of my lovely buttonhole. So I'm going to spin my fabric around, and once again, I'm going to insert my seam ripper on this end. Once I have it inserted, I'm going to cut to the middle, and there I have my perfect little buttonhole. To remove the button from the buttonhole foot, we're just going to put our thumb against that and open it up, and the button will fall right out. Now that we're done with this buttonhole foot, simply push it down on the one end and it'll pinch everything back together. One of my absolute favorite features of this BabyLock Zeal is it has a manual buttonhole. It's awesome because if I was to buy a beautiful gigantic button like this one, it will not fit in the automatic buttonhole foot. But the BabyLock Zeal comes with a second buttonhole foot that's a manual buttonhole foot, so that I can buy a big button, measure it, and sew out a buttonhole perfectly for the size of my larger button. So what is important in that is measuring the button. So when I take this button, I need to measure my diameter of the button, so that's the distance from the front to the back, as well as the depth of the button, and I'll mark my fabric accordingly. This is the manual buttonhole foot for the BabyLock Zeal. So we need to go ahead and install this on our machine so we can stitch it out and show you how it works. So in order to sew a manual buttonhole, I'm going to stay on my buttonhole selection. How do I place my fabric underneath the manual buttonhole foot? Well, it starts sewing here towards me, the bar tack, and as it sews, the fabric is going to continue to follow down towards me as it sews towards the back of the button. So I need to place this part of my fabric, the front of it, the towards me side, underneath my manual buttonhole foot, and I'm going to line those markings right in the center of where my needle falls into the foot. Once I have my fabric placed, I'm simply going to lower my presser foot. Let's begin sewing this manual buttonhole. And again, it begins with this bar tack right here on the front side of the buttonhole. Simply step on your foot pedal. All right, so I can see that I am at the back of my buttonhole. I've marked at my marking. So I need to lift my needle up out of my fabric. And on your automatic buttonhole, you've got your lever here that you've pulled down, and that foot actually measures the diameter. So for this manual buttonhole, I simply need to pull that forward. It's just a gentle click, and that's going to reset the buttonhole to do this back bar tack and sew towards the front. All right, let's see that. Once it gets towards the front, I'm going to lift my needle up out of the fabric, raise my presser foot, use my thread cutter on the side of the machine, and there I have my beautiful long manual buttonhole. It's just perfect for those large buttons. When your buttonholes are complete, you're going to need to put your little buttonhole lever back up into your machine. So simply push it straight back up into your machine. One of the awesome included accessories with the BabyLock Zeal is this excellent quilt bar or seam guide bar. You can use this so that you can line up a row of stitches against another row of stitches that you've already previously stitched. I just love it. So how do we install it? At the back of the presser foot holder, there is a port, and you simply place the bar into that port, and depending on where you need that guidance to be, this is where we're going to install the quilt bar and set it where we want it so that we can do our second row of stitches. Or if you were doing like seam allowance on a garment, you could put it right there next to the presser foot. One use of this quilt bar is to use it for what I call channel quilting, where we have rows and rows of stitches. So you set your quilt bar against your previous row of stitching so that your next row of stitching that you're about to perform happens in an equidistance from that first row that you already did, or the second or the third, or however many you have. So you simply place it where the quilt bar is measured against that area, that line of stitches, and sew your next line of stitches. So this is the additional spool pin that you can use if you're doing twin needle sewing. In order to install the spool pin, you're going to take the base of the spool pin right to this square on top of your machine to the left of your bobbin winder and simply push it right down in. That easy. This is the BabyLock Overcast or Over Edge Foot C. This allows us to seal the edges of easily fraying fabrics that like a burlap or a denim that might fray quite easily. So the idea behind this foot is that there is like a little bracket down the center of the foot, and you're going to choose a zigzag stitch, and that zigzag stitch is going to form over that bracket, and that little bracket or that little bar helps hold the edge of the fabric nice and flat so your zigzag stitch can form perfectly around the edge of your fabric. In order to do your overcasting, you're going to want to select Utility Stitch C, or the black C. We're going to have our width on 5, nice and wide, and our length at 2.5. When you line up your fabric underneath your presser foot, you're going to want the edge of your fabric right against this little black brace bracket here on the side of your foot. All right, let's see what this looks like. Okay, when you're done sewing, make sure your needle is up out of your fabric. Lift your presser foot up and use your cutter on the side. So as you can see, I did a pretty good job here towards the start, but then I let the fabric push against that little bracket and it folded that fabric in a little bit, which is not what you want. You want it to look like this. So be perfect, not like me. All right, so now we're going to do a blind hem. So the basic mechanics of a blind hem are explained in one of my videos on our Facebook page and on our YouTube page. But in essence, you're going to make the letter Z. Once you've made that letter Z, the fold at the top of the letter Z is going to get braced right against this white plastic brace right there. Once you've got that set where you want, you're good to go. But how do you get it? Test, test, test. This little dial here, when you spin it, it will take this guide further out to the right or further to the left. So depending on where you need to set that, this dial gets you into position. In order to do a blind hem on woven fabric, you're going to select stitch F from your utility stitches. That's the black set of stitches. And you'll set your standard stitch length on 2.5 and your stitch width on 5. All right, let's see what this looks like. Okay, so what's happening, I'm going to slow this down and turn my wheel, is that it sews a series of stitches on the right, which is just the folded up bottom of your hem, and then it's going to jump over to the left and take a bite of the fold. So watch, here it comes, there it is, and it takes a little bite out of the fold. Then it comes back over to the right and sews along. Okay, let's see what that looks like. I'm going to raise my presser foot, cut my thread on the side. All right, so on that one, I missed it. But on these, oops, on these you can see that I've gone ahead and I've got little bites there. So what does that look like on the right side of the fabric? When you turn it over, you're going to need to give it a good press. That's about the size of bite that you're going to want to be aiming for. That one right there is perfect. So there's your blind hem. These two are perfect over here too. Woohoo! Depending on what your fabric is that you need to blind hem, you're going to be selecting either E in the utility or F in the utility, the black stitches. E is going to be your stretch blind hem stitch, and your F is going to be woven blind hem, or fabrics that don't have a stretch. So I used F just a moment ago. Again, here is your width dial. So I had it in 5 at the widest. I had it selected on stitch selector F, and I used my standard stitch length of 2.5, and that's what formed my perfect blind hem. One of the easiest ways to install a zipper is to take 2 pieces of fabric, your left and right side, and go ahead and sew your seam on those. You're going to then place that seam directly over the coil zipper teeth or tape. So pin that in place, and that's how we're going to sew the zipper on the left side and right side. All right, let's take a moment to explain how the zipper foot works. So I'm going to raise my fabric and set it here. Now, as I hold this here for a second, let's just talk about this particular zipper foot, E. First of all, you can clamp that foot on either on the right or the left side, depending on which side of the zipper that you're installing. For right now, I'm going to be installing this onto the left side, my left, your left, of the zipper. So what do I need to do to make that happen? First of all, I'm going to choose stitch A, which is our utility straight stitch center needle position with a width of 3. Now, if we look at this foot, your teeth are going to be braced up against this little bridge that's on the underside of the foot. The needle then is going to sew in this little pocket. So you're going to want to make sure that when your needle comes in and out, that it's not too far to the left. If it's in the far left needle position, it would hit this foot and break the needle. So you want to make sure you're with your width of 3 with the center needle setting, and then you'll be good to go. All right, so let's get the fabric under the foot and see what that looks like. So I'm going to raise my foot, and I'm going to place it down, and you can actually see the height of the coil of the teeth there. And if I slowly bring my needle down, I'm going to just check that my needle is clear, which it is. So now let's sew it on that left side and see what it looks like. Of course, you're going to remove your pins before you hit them. Okay, there we are at our last pin. So when I'm there, I generally like to take my needle up out of the fabric, and I actually like to turn my fabric around. So I'm going to raise my presser foot, take that last pin out, spin my fabric around, and now I'm going to do the same thing, but on the other side. So I'm going to brace my zipper teeth against that little kind of bridge on the underside of my foot, and I like to bring my needle down just to make sure that I'm going to stitch that first stitch okay, which it is. It's clear of my teeth. All right, let's keep on sewing back to the top. Okay, once I'm there at the top, I'm going to raise my needle up out of my fabric, raise my presser foot, bring my fabric around, use my thread cutter, and there I've installed my zipper. So at this point, I would take my seam ripper and just open up that seam to give my zipper pull access to open and close my zipper. Let's just take a moment to look at some of our awesome stitches that are built in the BabyLock Zeal. Okay, so as I've mentioned, the top set of stitches are your utility stitches and your bottom set of stitches are your stretch stitches. So if you look at A and B, they are both straight stitches. A is in the center needle position, B is in the far left needle position. Of course, you have your zigzag, and then this one is a triple zigzag under selection D. This is also called a tricot stitch. It's perfect for installing elastic. E and F, of course, are your blind hem stitches. G is for forming shell tucks. Your manual goes into further depth about that particular stitch, as well as this. This is a bridging stitch. Now here at the end, you've got some beautiful satin stitches. Now with those satin stitches, your stitch length and stitch width settings are going to make a big difference in how these guys look. So be sure and play around with those a little bit. All right, let's talk about our stretch stitches. A and B are triple stitches. It forms 3 sets of stitches in one spot, which is a very bold and beautiful stitch. I love to use it for top stitching. Under C, you've got a triple zigzag. This is really, really cool. It looks like rickrack. It's a beautiful decorative stitch. Then you have a smocking stitch. You have 2 stretch stitch overcasting type of stitches, as well as this one here, which is perfect for installing collars on t-shirts. This one is a bit of a decorative stitch. This one is, it allows you to do, to insert ribbon or cord underneath of it, and then you have some more decorative stitches under your stretch stitch way of sewing. Okay, so that wraps up our tutorial on the BabyLock Zeal. I hope you've enjoyed yourself and you've learned a lot. Remember, if you don't have this machine yet, we have 3 different ways that we can get it to you so you can start your awesome sewing journey. First, you can visit us on our website at www.sewing.net. Not only do we have this awesome machine, but a whole slew of other awesome products and beautiful fabrics. You can also come in and visit us right here at the Sewing Studio Fabric Superstore in Maitland, Florida, or take a journey to the Villages in Florida, North Florida, and that is the Sewing Studio at Lady Lake. Thank you so much for joining me, everybody. Now take off and sew.